Okay, I'm going to hit this real quick. I deal with it in some other areas, but I'm trying to get through to a certain point before lunch here. Dealing with stress. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but we all experience stress. It is normal for every person in the world. It's not exclusively a ministry thing, but ministry certainly bears a lot of stress inherent in it, as many other things do. The problem is not stress. The problem is our perception and our response. Because nothing you do in this world is going to be completely stress-free. So the problem is not stress. It's your perception, your view about stress, and your response to stress. Okay? So I'm going to give you, I'm not going to belabor them. I'm going to give you real quickly a couple things. Turn to Psalm 4. Psalm 4. The word stress itself is not in the Bible, but the word distress is, and it literally means to be under stress. So it works. It's the one. That's the one. That's the Bible word for it. So he says in verse number 1, "Hear me when I call, O God of my righteousness. Thou hast enlarged me when I was in distress. Have mercy upon me and hear my prayer." Verse number 3, But know that the Lord has set apart him that is godly for himself. The Lord will hear when I call unto him. So 3 reasons why God allows stress. This is the perception side of things. Why does God allow us to be stressed? Number 1, so that we'll turn to him. We'll turn to him and pay attention to him. Number 2, because he wants us to grow. Stress causes things to grow. Anything that is going to grow must be stressed to be tested so that it can be trusted, right? My son was a welder, and before he started on deputation, he welded for a number of years. And what they had to do periodically was they had to take a weld and they had to stress test it, right? Why? Because when pressure came along, they had to know that it could handle the stress of the pressure, so it had to be tested. That's what stress does. It tests to make sure there's soundness, right? But also it enlarges because he had to become a better welder to pass those tests. You understand? So he grew as a welder because of the stress tests. And that's how all of life is. We grow to be able to pass the test. Okay? And he says that, "Thou hast enlarged me when I was in distress." And then the third thing is this, that stress sanctifies. That's God's intention with it. Look at verse number 3 there. The Lord has set apart him that is godly for himself. That is like literally the definition of sanctification. Okay? So stress sanctifies. It sets us apart to God. It removes the things that hinder or that create problems. It removes them so that we can be closer to God. We can be more, godly. We can be right with him. Okay? And stress is, and so often the problem with stress is that very thing, that when we're under stress, it brings out all the carnal responses. And God does that on purpose to expose them, not so you can use them, right? And so they're exposed, and God's like, "Okay, deal with this." And we're like, "No, I'm going to respond that way," And that's the opposite of what God's trying to do. So you have to see the perception of what God's doing. In Isaiah 30, he says, that he'll show us our teachers. He says, "Neither will your teachers be moved into a corner anymore, but thou shalt see them. And then thou shalt hear a word behind thee saying, This is the way, walk ye in it. And turn not when you turn not to the right hand or the left." All right, so stress often comes in similar forms in our life. and I don't mean in similar forms for all of us equally in that sense. I mean, in your particular life, there's probably some certain things that if I said, what are the things that stress you the most? And you'd be like, this, and this. And it's like, they always happen, and they always bring stress. And so here's what those things are. I'm about to help you really a lot right here, okay? Those are your teachers given to you by God. And He wants you to look at them like that. You ever taught a class where one kid did nothing but fight you the whole time? And you're like, I can't teach this kid anything because he won't submit to the teacher. Well, that's how God feels about you. And your teachers too. Because most of the time, when we get a teacher going, we do everything. We're like that 5-year-old kid that squirms and twists and turns and pulls and runs away because we don't want to, I don't want to learn that lesson. I want out, I'm too stressed and all this, right? Because we refuse to submit to the teacher. And God's trying to get us to submit to the teacher, to learn, to grow, to become stronger, to become better, to be sanctified. And we're just like refusing and not responding properly. And so what we do is we magnify the stress because of our carnal responses, and we make it worse. And then on top of that, we're dooming ourselves to have to go through the test again. Because, the way God's testing works is that He never passes someone on. Like they do in school now. Oh, they can't read? It's all right, just pass them on. Nope. With God, you just keep taking the same test over and over and over again till you pass. Right? Yep. So if that's your goal in life, like my goal is to make God know that I cannot ever pass this test, so I'm going to fail it every time. Well, you're dumb. One. But also, you're never going to be more for God. And so you got to have the right view, the right perspective of what is stress. It's not God trying to hurt you. It's not God trying to destroy you and punish you. It's like every time that something bad happens in your life, it's not God's punishment every time. It's just not. Stop looking at it like that. Amen. Stop blaming God for bad things happening. Sometimes bad things happen because you need to grow through them. You need the fire every once in a while so you can see the glory. Right? Never get to see the fourth man till you're in the fire. So that stress comes. If we accept it and receive it, God wants to use it. So how do we accept and receive it? How do we respond? How should we respond? Look at 6 responses here in verse number 4 and 5. He says, first, stand in awe. That's number 1. I'm going to come back and say something about each of these real quick. But number 2, sin not. Number 3, commune with your own heart on your bed. Number 4, be still. Number 5, offer the sacrifices of righteousness. Number 6, put your trust in the Lord. So there's 6 statements there. All right. What do we mean? Well, 1, stand in awe. Go back to perspective here a second. The reason that stress is so bad for us is that we are in awe of the wrong thing. And we're fixated on the problem. And we're not focusing on the problem solver. We're looking at the drama and the danger and the whatever it is, and we're not turning our attention toward God. And if you're going to deal with stress properly, you got to have the right view. You got to get your view fixed on the one that solves our problems, on Him. It's turn your attention. And remember, that was the first thing He said here about turning to God, calling on God. The very first time stress is mentioned in the Bible, it's in Genesis there where Jacob is going back to see Esau, right? And he hears Esau's coming with 400 men, and this is the first time the word, and he was distressed and greatly afraid, right? Yeah. Why was he distressed and greatly afraid? Because he had been an idiot. And in his mind, he just knew Esau's coming to kill us. And he had a brilliant strategy. You remember that? Like he said, okay, I'm going to take some of the flocks. I'm going to put them up front with one of the wives. And if I know he's going to kill some of us, so which wife do I want to die first? That's the benefit of having 4 wives. You can put the one out front there that's like, if I have to sacrifice one, she's the one. How would you feel being that wife? Anyway, but he was distressed. And you know what God did through that? Well, what do we find in that passage? Well, he turns and he starts calling on God. This is the time when he wrestles with God, right? He turns to God. He starts wrestling with God. God makes him a promise that he's going to make him as the sands of the sea, right? His descendants. He said, I'm going to bless you, okay? And then what happens? God touches the hollow of his thigh. He never walked the same after that, right? But also, God changed his name. And he became Israel right there. God sanctified him, okay? But what happened for that to occur was that he took his attention off of Esau's coming and he put it on my rock, my fortress, my defender, my shield, right? He got a real intense focus on God. Stand in awe, right? And then sin not. Don't turn to the flesh. Stress often causes us to revert to our carnal behaviors, right? That thing, that besetting sin. Okay? Sin not. Don't do that. Commune with your own heart on your bed means to meditate. Put on a biblical meditation. Okay? Again, I'm not going to go into detail on that. There's a book out there on it. I taught on it before, but biblical meditation is very important. And then be still. Don't make decisions when you're in stress. Just don't make big change decisions under stress. Take your time, be patient. You don't have to rush into a decision. Usually that's the time you make the worst decisions. Doesn't mean God won't give you clarity during those times, but make sure it's God and not just you pulling the escape hatch. Okay? And then offer the sacrifices of righteousness. I think this is an interesting one because I looked that phrase up, and there's a lot that could be said about that. But basically, I think it kind of could boil down to this. Righteousness is rightness, right? Doing right. And can I tell you, when you're under stress, just doing the right thing is often a sacrifice. I mean, you're stressed out, you don't want to do the right thing. Finances have crumbled, and here you got your paycheck, and you're supposed to tithe, but you really need that money somewhere else. It's a sacrifice to do the right thing. It's okay. Do it. Do what's right anyway. Right? And then last thing he says, put your trust in the Lord. Don't get expectations of people. You better not set your heart on people to solve your problems. It's not the church, and it's not Visa, and it's not someone else. It's the Lord that's going to bring you through. Keep your focus on him, okay? So just basic stress responses there. Not that any of you ever deal with stress, but you can share that with some people in your church that do. All right, I'm almost done with I'm trying to get through just the general section. We're not to marriage or family yet, so before lunch I'm trying to get through the general stuff. All right. 2 Timothy 1:5 says, when I call to remembrance the unfeigned faith that is in thee, which dwelt first in thy grandmother Lois and thy mother Eunice, and I am persuaded that in thee also. I like that word, unfeigned not fake. So here's the next topic, being real. The necessity of authenticity. In 2 Corinthians 6, I'm not going to read all of this, but essentially he says, we as workers together with him beseech you, I'm going to read a bit of it, that ye also should receive, that ye receive not the grace of God in vain, for he hath said, I have heard thee in a time accepted, in the day of salvation I have secured thee. Behold, now is the accepted time, behold, now is the day of salvation, giving no offense in anything, that the ministry be not blamed, but in all things approving ourselves as ministers of God, in much patience and affliction and necessities and stresses, stripes and imprisonments and tumults and labors and watching and fasting, by pureness, by knowledge, by long-suffering, by kindness, by the Holy Ghost, by love unfeigned, not faked, right? By the word of truth, by the power of God, by the armor of righteousness on the right hand and the left, by honor, dishonor. He goes on, and it's basically just saying, just be real in every circumstance, every situation, doesn't matter, no faking it. Be real. Be real, okay? What Paul's speaking of in these two texts is just that importance of authenticity in life and ministry. And can I say that in the family, your kids know when you're faking it. They know. They know when it's not real. And often what happens, and I don't understand this, so I'm going to just get myself in trouble on this, but we are in a time when I think there have always been folks who just weren't real in ministry. In every area of life, not just ministry, but in every area, but in ministry too. And when I say that, what I mean is that they pretended to be what others were. Is that fair? They pretended to be. And they pretended amongst preachers, other preachers, like, yeah, we're just like everybody else. And they pretended in front of their church. Yep, this is what we are, this is what we do. But then they weren't. They didn't, for real, at home. And so their kids grew up with hypocrites. And they either become hypocrites or they hate hypocrites. And can I say, just having counseled a lot of ministry kids, it's the number one accusation. Like by far, the number one accusation, hypocrisy. They're not real. They said this in church, didn't do it at home. Told everyone that it wasn't okay to yell and scream at your family, but then they did, right? Taught against, worldliness, but then did these things in private, right? Had standards here in front of everybody, but then when no one was looking, none of those standards mattered. Preached against rock music, listened to it when we went on vacation. You understand what I'm saying? Not real. It's not real. I honestly believe that one of the most important things you can do for your family has nothing to do with how strict your rules are. It has everything to do with how consistent you are in them. You got to be the same. You got to be the same. There has to be authenticity to who you are everywhere. And if there's not, then that hypocrisy is going to destroy your family. It's not the rules that are going to destroy them. That's what's going to get blamed. Well, it's just that we were so strict. Maybe. I'm not saying it never happens. I'm saying more often it's the hypocrisy. Okay? And so we have this issue today. So I'm just going to name it because it is an issue. And it's called situational standards. And it is big time, big time. And I'm going to be clear here. I do not care what your personal standards are. It doesn't matter to me. Okay? But it is a problem if you have situational standards and you're teaching your kids that, or your family or your church, that we have a standard here and not here, and it's all just situational. That's a problem because it's hypocrisy. Okay? I can't, and by the way, I put this on Facebook the other day just because every once in a while, I don't really read Facebook. Every once in a while, I just have a thought and I just put it on Facebook. And I was interested to see what kind of response. And so this is what I put on Facebook. I'm trying to understand what the difference is between situational standards and situational ethics. I think that's a good question. And I'm not trying to be facetious. I'm just trying to understand what is that, because I don't understand it. And you know what? The only direct response I got back was, I question the motive of this question. What? That's it. You question my motive? I'm just asking the question. I'm curious, what is the difference? Because I'm just being, from my perspective, they're the same. Now, everybody I know preaches against situational ethics. There's a hypocrisy in it. But I'm just telling you, it's situational standards is the same thing. You've got to be consistent. If you're, and again, I don't care what your standards are. Everybody has standards, by the way. That's right. Everybody. Okay. I went to the place we get some decals for our buses and stuff. I went there and I sat down, and the lady was the receptionist was there. She said, "It'll be just a minute." So I sat down and I look over on the right of me, and there's a stack of Rolling Stone magazines, and on the top was a picture of a guy with tattoos all over, and he had his eyes closed, and he had tattoos on his eyelids and all this kind of stuff. I must have gotten some kind of a look on my face. I didn't think I did, but I must have, because the lady says, "Isn't that disgusting?" And I looked up, and here she is, got a tank top on. She's tattooed over like this and crossed her, like that. And she's got a nose ring in and stuff. And I said, yeah. But in my mind, I'm thinking, and here's what she said. She said, "I know I have tattoos and I have a nose ring, but I can wear a shirt to cover them up. And I can take my nose ring out, but that is disgusting." And it clicked in my mind. She has standards. They're not the same as my standards. She has standards. Then it blew my mind when I went to Walmart and realized every person in Walmart sees someone else in Walmart and thinks, how could they have worn that to Walmart? And you're like, all of y'all. But they're also thinking the same thing about somebody else. The person with the least standards of everyone you know questions the standards of someone else. My point, everyone has standards. I'm not your God. I'm not your judge. Just don't be a hypocrite. Just don't be a hypocrite. Be real. You know? And by the way, just throwing this out there, I do believe that we ought to always defer to the higher standard, not the lower standard. I do believe that. And I believe generally speaking, and if you want to know what I believe personally, and I'm not judging anybody, this is my personal, how I believe and how I behave, how I teach in our church. I believe that standards are a question of holiness. Amen. And that is the question of standard. Every standard is a question of holiness. How does it relate to the holiness of God, and how do I demonstrate the holiness of God in my life? And that's what standards are for. And it's not for me to browbeat people or judge people with. It's a question of my standing before God and being holy as He is holy. That's the question. Okay? But regardless, God's holiness is consistent. It's the same. It's the same everywhere. God is not one kind of holy in heaven and another kind of holy down here.
That's right.
Same. I am the same, I change not. You got to put that on. Be real. All right? Spiritual, I don't want to get into that one before. We only have that much time. We'll get to this one afterwards, this afternoon. We're going to talk about spiritual conflict in the family later this afternoon. I'm not going to get into it right now. Discretion. This is a tough one in ministry, but not oversharing about your family. I'm the worst offender here, so just throwing that out there, all right? But what I'm going to tell you is true, even if I'm a hypocrite. Be real. I'm going to be real about the fact that this is hard. Yeah, amen, brother. That's my goal here. All your families are going to walk away, well, at least we don't marry that guy, huh? That's the one good thing about marriage counseling is in marriage, when you marriage counsel with someone, you always walk away going, I am so thankful that is not my wife. I'm just messing with you. Anyway. All right, Proverbs 11:13 says, a talebearer revealeth secrets, but he that is of a faithful spirit concealeth the matter. There is a danger of oversharing from the pulpit, and sometimes just in general, concerning the private lives of your family. Right. And not everything that your wife or kids do wrong or dumbly should be shared publicly. They ought to be able to do dumb stuff every once in a while, and it just be private. Every once in a while. You understand what I'm saying there? But it's like, I know that I saw a meme sometime back about, when you're in a ministry family, everything you do will be used against you from the pulpit. And I think that that's unfortunately a general truth. And that there's a danger that we bring public shame on our family because everybody knows their mistakes. And it becomes very difficult for them. And you say, well, it was just funny, so I shared it, or, it's a good illustration. And I'm being very frank with you when I say this. I have revealed a lot of personal things about our family in my books and in preaching and counseling. And not everything that I've revealed shouldn't have been revealed. I'm not saying that. But I will say this, if we're not careful, we run the risk of pushing our kids particularly into victimhood thinking. Because victimhood thinking is produced when there is a perception that there is public shame heaped on a person. Like, the society views me this way, and then I begin to view myself that way. The church knows about every dumb thing I've ever done. They think I'm an idiot. I'm a victim of stuff here. And that also increases their skepticism of everyone based on their perception of what people think about them because of all the things that have been told about them. And so you say, so should I never use my family as an illustration? Should I never use things in my marriage or my kids as an illustration? I'm not saying that. I really am not. Because I do think that there's an element of vulnerability in ministry that you can't effectively minister to people without them knowing that you've sat where they sat. Okay, that's a reality. But I think sometimes it's first of all the way we share things. If you're the hero of every story you tell and your wife is the villain, that's a problem. If you're the savior and your kids are always the adults, that's a problem. Secondly, I think that there are times when it's appropriate to ask permission to use private stories. I would never get up in front of my church and tell private stories about anyone else in my church without their permission. I wrote a book it's on the table. The new books are on the table on the north wall there out in the foyer. The marriage manual is one I finished this year. In that book, I wrote a story about one of the families in our church. And before I did, I went to them and asked their permission to use their story. Why would that be different for my family? Right? Is it okay if I tell folks this? I'd rather you not. Okay. I may have to study a little harder to find a good illustration now. Or I may have to make up the names and circumstances of this story have been changed to protect the guilty. I'm going to tell you something that may have happened to someone once somewhere far, far away. Not my family, but, but your family should have a right of refusal on some things to be that are shared. They need to have that. And by the way, if they know that they have that, they probably won't exercise it all the time. But they need to know they have it. And quite frequently, I have exposed a lot of things about, but very few things, and not that I haven't, but I learned some lessons because of it. But very few things that I've ever exposed have been without talking to my wife about it first. And her saying, yeah, I can see how that could help people. And that's a joint decision. But it's an important decision to make together, okay? Because oversharing can make her feel betrayed. That's right. And your kids betrayed. And vulnerable in a way beyond what they're comfortable. Okay? So you got to be cautious about that. All right, let's stop here. I'm going to pick one thing up when we get back from our break this afternoon, but because I don't want to rush it. But we have about 10 minutes for Q&A if you have questions about anything we've covered yesterday or today so far. Questions? Anybody have questions? Or is everyone just in a hurry to go to HTO? Go ahead.
My question pertains to earlier involving the family and the ministry and how important that is, which is obviously very true. What would you say, though, if you're involved in a ministry similar to like the Hope Addictions ministry, where there's obviously some dangers there as well, as far as allowing your kids to be susceptible to some of those things? How would you go about involving your family, but also not putting them in the line of danger, so to speak?
Yeah. Every pastor or missionary or every ministry has people in it that would not be a good influence on your kids. So that's a reality. And what I mean by that is that they're not that they're evil people, but maybe they're not spiritual people, right? And I think that there has to be a balance between my kids know we're in ministry and we're ministering and we love people, versus I'm giving people that are not spiritual unfettered access to my children and influence over my children without my presence. And so I think that's the question of balance there. My kids can be with me when we minister, but I'm probably not going to. Matter of fact, our policy was, and I might get into this later too, but I don't remember if that's in my notes or not, but our policy, our kids never spent the night anywhere away from us, except with the exception of they did stay at my parents' house a few times. But that was literally the only place ever that my kids stayed outside of our, when we weren't with them. They never had sleepovers or anything like that. And I know people are like, oh, it's just not fair that kids can't have sleepovers. Yeah, you haven't counseled all the people that have been molested that I've counseled that happened at sleepovers. And not a chance in this world I would let my kids sleep over anywhere. And we didn't have a lot of sleepovers at our place either. There's plenty of daytime playing where there's attention given and stuff. I just don't. So I'm real cautious about unfettered access for anyone to my kids. I don't believe in overprotection in the sense of like not letting them have any life, but I do believe that there's got to be a real strong boundary of protection in that sense, regardless of the ministry you're in. So, all right. Any other questions?
You had mentioned in the family thing that sometimes it's hard to get a difference between grandpa and pastor, things of that nature. What would be advice for someone that takes a church that seems to be the issue with some, as far as that goes?
It is difficult. It's difficult for people who grew up in a church, and there's a lot of folks like that grew up in a church where that there wasn't a distinction made between relationships of pastor, and they don't conceive of a pastor pastoring them. They really conceive of, the pastor's there, he's pastoring other people, and he should tell other people, but with me, I just do whatever I want because it's always okay with pastor. So in our circumstance, I just sat down, and it's not just one person. I've had a couple like this, where I sat down and said, listen, let me teach you about what a pastor's role is. And I tried to teach him and explain to him, and then I just refused to let them. I know this sounds mean, but there are times when, for no other reason than just that they needed to understand that I wasn't a rubber stamp for everything they decided, that I just said no. It wasn't something like that would hurt them when I said no, but they needed to understand that sometimes as pastor, I'm going to make that decision that it's a no. And not to be mean, but I could tell there was a problem there, that there was something I could teach them more than saying yes. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. There's sometimes as a parent, you say no because there's a lesson that needs to be taught here that it's not going to hurt them to hear no. They need to hear no sometimes. And there's a better lesson I can teach them with saying no right now than saying yes, even if saying yes wouldn't be bad necessarily. And so we've had a few of those type of things. I will say this about ministry kids, missionary kids in particular. And I love missionaries. I love our missionaries. I love our missionary kids. I do. I love them tremendously. Missionary kids tend to have a misunderstanding about local church authority and autonomy because they grow up going church to church to church. They know all these pastors. They know all these churches. And then they're over here, and then they're here, and they're here, and they're here. And the concept of, but this is my church, and it's not okay for me to just go wherever I feel like going at the time, and I need to submit myself to my pastor and not just be my own authority. That's a hard concept. And it's not their fault. It's just the nature of how they grow up. It's just, and I certainly know that none of the missionaries I know would have even ever implied that that's the way. But it's like sometimes a lot of things are picked up just by experience as opposed to instruction. And so that's a hard thing sometimes for missionary kids also to grab in principle, and it's just something that you have to just sit down and talk about. Sometimes there's hurt feelings over it. Not my part. It should never be on our part as pastor. And it should never be intentional, right? But it's just, hey, I love you, but you need to understand this reality, okay? This is the truth. And we need to come to a good biblical perception of that. So, it just, sometimes you just got to deal with it directly. But it's easier if they're still young, when those things come up. If they're older and that's how it was, and now they're really, really set in their ways, I just don't know that. I mean, you can sit down and explain it, but I wouldn't be overly hopeful that they're just going to go, okay, yeah, I totally missed that, you know. And but you know, but it still needs to be taught. You're still You're responsible to teach people whether you believe they're going to respond properly or not. You're responsible to truth, so you got to teach truth, and if they don't respond right, that's not your fault as long as you approached in love and truth and tried to teach them in compassionate love. You know, now if you try and blow them out of the water, maybe it is your fault, but you know, that shouldn't be the case. So, yeah. Any other questions real quick? Then let's pray and eat. Brother Sage, you look hungry enough to pray. Do it.